What does a life without purpose look like? It looked exactly like the life of Yamagishi Haruka. He was an old man defined by quiet misery. At work, he was a ghost. His superiors constantly scolded him, and his juniors treated him like he didn't even exist. No respect, no recognition. He was the walking definition of a background character in his own story. He had no partner, no hobbies, and zero passion for anything. Just a dull, crushing routine that repeated until the day he finally died. It was a mercy, really. But death, it seems, wasn't the end. It was just a hard reset. When he opened his eyes, the world was gone. He awoke in the middle of a vast forest, sunlight filtering through the canopy. The air smelled vivid and clean, a stark contrast to the smog he was used to. He looked down at his hands and froze. The skin was smooth and dark. His body felt slender, completely unfamiliar. When he saw his reflection in a nearby river, his breathing stopped. A woman stared back at him, an impossibly beautiful dark elf with silver hair and piercing red eyes. Her figure was graceful, almost otherworldly. For a long moment, he just stared. This was the classic Isekai trope. The legends from fantasy novels were real, and somehow he was now one of them. Yet this is where the psychological dissonance kicks in. Inside, he was still the same middle-aged man. He didn't know whether to laugh at the absurdity or despair at the transformation. A sudden cry echoed from deep in the forest. It was sharp and definitely not human. The sound reminded him of where he was, a world far from ordinary. If this were a manga, he figured someone would have summoned him as a hero. Or maybe a divine message would pop up. But there was nothing. Only silence and a crushing sense of isolation. The realization hit hard. He was utterly alone in an unknown world. Anxiety crept in. How would he survive without food, shelter, or anyone to talk to? Trying to calm his nerves, Haruka picked up a fallen branch, holding it like a wand. He'd dreamed of being a magician or a hero as a kid. Maybe here, those dreams weren't impossible. He focused his thoughts on fire, a large, roaring blaze like a bonfire from TV. He visualized its heat, its motion, then spoke a single word. Burn. A violent flash of flame erupted. The air trembled with heat. The fire leapt toward the river, hissing and devouring everything in its path. Haruka stood frozen, overwhelmed by shock and awe. It was real. He had used magic. But his elation quickly turned to fear. The flames were far stronger than he intended. This was not a tool. It was a weapon. As he turned around, he found a man standing a few meters away. An armored soldier, sword drawn, his expression wired with tension. For a moment, neither moved. The soldier's eyes were wide with caution. Haruka's heart pounded. He'd never faced a real weapon before. He slowly raised his hands, hoping to show he meant no harm. He was expecting a fight. He was expecting to beg for his life. He was not expecting this. The soldier's body began to tremble uncontrollably. The man pissed his pants. To Haruka's disbelief, the man's knees gave out and he collapsed to the ground in a full-blown panic. This is the first sign of Haruka's new reality. His internal self-image is weak old man, but the world now sees him as an overwhelming, terrifying force. Embarrassed by the whole scene, Haruka hesitantly suggested the man compose himself before they continued. When the armored stranger returned, he acted as if nothing had happened. He introduced himself as Ralph, a second-class adventurer from a city called Orans. The words felt surreal. Adventurers, cities, ranks. A fictional world made real. When Haruka tried to introduce himself, he faltered. He was a dark elf on the outside, but still an aging man on the inside. Unsure what to say, he just gave his real name and claimed to have lost his memories. The classic amnesia card. It's lazy writing in a novel, but it's the most practical lie in an isekai. Ralph accepted the explanation without question, though surprise flickered across his face. By the way, since Haruka is now a female elf, we'll be referring to her as she from now on. Anyway, Haruka asked if Ralph could guide her to the nearest settlement. He agreed readily, and they set out. Along the way, Ralph explained bits about the world. Before long, the trees thinned, revealing a bustling city surrounded by stone walls. This was Orans, part of the merchant city-state of Plain, a nation supposedly built on freedom and merit. The streets were alive with merchants and travelers. Ralph first took Haruka to a tailor to buy her shoes and a notebook, insisting she needed proper equipment. As they walked, he explained the adventurer system. It starts at the 10th class and goes up to the 1st. The highest tier is known as special rank, individuals said to rival monsters in strength. Haruka listened intently, recording every detail in neat handwriting. Ralph then suggested she register as an adventurer. With her magic and the rare heritage of a dark elf, she would naturally stand out. Smiling, Ralph promised to take her to the guild the next morning and left her at a nearby inn to rest. He seemed helpful. Maybe a little too helpful. Alone in her room, the reality of her old life came flooding back. She reviewed her notes. Mana, spells, incantations, concepts that felt both foreign and fascinating. For the first time in years, she was learning with genuine curiosity. As she lay on the bed, she remembered the long hours at the office, the endless reprimands, the late nights ending only in exhaustion. Her life had been an unbroken pattern of work, eat, and sleep, a hollow existence without purpose or joy. Slowly, even the desire to hope had faded. But now, in this strange new world, that emptiness felt distant. For once, the future wasn't predetermined. Closing her eyes, Haruka allowed herself a quiet thought. Perhaps this wasn't a curse, but a chance. The next morning, Haruka woke up and went down to the inn's dining area, only to feel dozens of eyes lock onto her. People stared in shock, whispering to one another. She froze, confused. Are dark elves really that rare? A girl with bangs was staring straight at her, her gaze lingering far too long. This is that classic main character anxiety. She still thinks like an invisible old man, but she looks like a supermodel. The disconnect is painful. Uneasy, Haruka quickly turned around and decided to take her breakfast back to her room. She had just started eating when someone knocked. It was Ralph, smiling as usual, but the moment he saw Haruka, his face stiffened. Without a word, he snatched the empty plate from her, cleared his throat, and said she should probably wear something less revealing. That's when it hit her. The stares, the whispers. It wasn't just because she was a dark elf. It was because her starting outfit was apparently walking fan service. Flustered, Haruka hurriedly slipped her jacket back on. Ralph then invited her to go outside. As they walked, Haruka noticed the sharp divide between the wealthy and the poor. Stray figures huddled in alleys. She remembered Ralph saying strength was everything here. It's the harsh reality of a meritocracy. Freedom for the strong means vulnerability for the weak. A small boy suddenly bumped into her, mumbling an apology before dashing off. The child's bright energy made her chest feel strangely warm. But before she could smile, Ralph sprinted after the boy and caught him roughly. He ordered the kid to return what he'd stolen. The boy hesitated, then shoved something into Ralph's hand before fleeing. It was Haruka's notebook. She hadn't even realized it was gone. Ralph sighed, explaining that street kids from the slums often picked pockets to survive. They probably mistook it for a wallet. Haruka felt a pang of pity, not anger. When they reached the Adventurers Guild, the real bureaucracy began. A cheerful receptionist greeted them and handed Haruka a registration form. Strangely enough, Haruka could read and understand the local language perfectly. The classic Isekai auto-translator perk. But when she reached the age section, she froze. She didn't know how old her new body was. Ralph quickly explained the amnesia story. The receptionist flipped through a handbook and mentioned that dark elves typically reach adulthood at 18, marked by wearing ear cuffs. She suggested Haruka just write 17 to be safe. After paying the fee, the receptionist said her adventurer tag would be ready by evening and recommended she join the new adventurer training session. As they left, Haruka finally had to ask why Ralph was being so kind to her. Ralph blinked, rubbed the back of his neck, and said it was just a gut feeling. Haruka didn't look convinced. That's the nice guy answer. It's never the real answer. So, Ralph added honestly that the moment he met her, he'd been overwhelmed. Not just by her immense magical presence, but also by how beautiful she looked. Blushing, Ralph laughed nervously and confessed he might have fallen in love at first sight. Haruka froze. This is the core conflict. Deep down, she is still the same middle-aged man. She has zero idea how to respond to a romantic confession from another man. After a long pause, she just muttered not to expect too much from her. Ralph smiled anyway, saying he didn't want anything in return. He just wanted to help. Then he mentioned he'd already booked her room for an entire week before heading off. Feeling guilty, Haruka realized she needed to start earning money fast. That kind of help always comes with strings attached. She spent the afternoon in the library studying, then arrived early for the adventurer training. The room was empty until a quiet boy entered. He had fox-like ears and a hooded cloak. A beast man, Haruka guessed. He sat down without a greeting and began arranging small stones on his desk, lost in concentration. Two more arrived, a young girl and a boy. Both stopped in surprise when they saw Haruka, the mysterious dark elf. Surrounded by these bright, youthful faces, Haruka couldn't help feeling awkward. She was biologically young, but mentally she was old enough to be their father. Their instructor arrived next, a young woman in a witch's hat. When Haruka looked closer, she realized it was the same girl who had been staring at her in the dining hall that morning. The woman carried herself professionally, introducing herself as Ari, a third-class adventurer. She began the lesson explaining that this world was home to many races: humans, beastmen, dwarves, elves, all collectively called people. On the other side were the destroyers, mermaids, lizardmen, goblins, vampires, giants, and countless other dangers. It was the adventurer's duty to fight them. Listening to her words, Haruka felt both excitement and dread. The idea of magic thrilled her, but the reality of fighting terrified her. She'd never been good with violence. She'd always been the cowardly type, surviving by avoiding trouble. Maybe adventuring wasn't for someone like her. As class ended, she quietly stood to leave, already planning a safer way to live. But before she could step outside, the three young adventurers stopped her, their faces flushed with nervous energy. With hesitant but hopeful voices, they asked if she would form a party with them. A cheerful, reckless-looking boy introduced himself as Albert. He was only 14, the son of a former adventurer. The girl beside him, Corin, seemed to be his childhood friend. The way she teased him, saying he's the type who dies easily, made that obvious. Next came the beast man, Montana. Strangely, he claimed to be a dwarven blacksmith. Albert blinked in confusion because, obviously, Montana explained that a giant bird abducted him when he was little. He was later rescued and raised by a dwarf who became his adoptive father. Everyone's attention then turned to Haruka, who had been silently watching. With a hesitant smile, she just gave her name. The kid's enthusiasm was infectious, like fireworks. Despite herself, she couldn't just say no. The group immediately buzzed with excitement, talking about her magic and Montana's daggers. Their chatter drowned out Haruka's attempts to explain she'd rather work quietly in town. Her anxiety built up until, at last, she slammed the table and declared she'd think about it overnight. Without waiting for a response, she rushed off. But just as she turned a corner, a sword came flying straight at her. It barely missed, lodging itself in a wall. A panicked boy ran over, bowing and apologizing. The weapon had slipped during practice. Looking around, Haruka realized she was near a training ground. Most were swordsmen, but another area was dedicated to magicians. There, she spotted a young girl practicing with intense focus. Her spells were weak, fizzling midair, her expression twisted with pain. Concerned, Haruka approached and asked if she was all right. The girl managed a tired smile, saying it was just magic intoxication, a headache from channeling too much mana. Her limit was only 5 or 6 spells. Deciding to rest, she offered Haruka the training spot. Haruka wasn't that interested, but it wouldn't hurt to see what her own limits were. Around her, young mages were casting simple fire arrows, pausing to rest after just a few shots. Haruka focused, reciting the incantation. From her fingertip, a swirling flame took shape. She willed it to solidify into an arrow. Drawing a slow breath, she pointed at the target and released it. The arrow shot forward and exploded dead center. A chill ran down her spine. It wasn't fear, it was exhilaration. She didn't stop. She cast spell after spell. Wind, water, fire again. Each one sharper, faster, stronger. The other mages began to gather, whispering in awe. Haruka barely noticed. Laughter burst out of her, pure and unrestrained. For the first time in 40 years, Haruka felt alive. When she finally stopped, the crowd was thick. She'd fired at least 50 shots, and not once had she felt the magic intoxication. A wave of relief washed over her. At least she wouldn't slow down any future teammates. Though she quickly shook the thought away. She wasn't planning to be an adventurer. Just as she turned to leave, a familiar voice called out. It was Eri, appearing out of nowhere. She looked straight at Haruka and said she wanted to talk. Ari brought Haruka to a small, inexpensive cafe hidden at the edge of the market. She carried over a simple bowl of bread and sausages, then began assembling a makeshift hot dog, adding vegetables and sauce. It looked rough, but Eri ate it without complaint. She urged Haruka to eat, assuring her the meal was on her. But the dark elf remained hesitant. She reminded Eri their meeting was for discussion, not dining. Realizing her mistake, Eri quickly apologized. The real purpose soon surfaced. Eri asked about Haruka's relationship with Ralph, having seen them together. The question carried a sharp edge, making Haruka suspect jealousy. She clarified that Ralph had merely offered help, and there was nothing romantic between them. Eri seemed relieved. Wiping the sauce from her lips, she said it was for the best, warning Haruka to stay away from him. Ralph, she explained, had a bad habit of toying with women. One of her friends had been driven to tears because of him. Her expression darkened. Haruka, though silent, sensed the truth. She had already noticed that same reckless charm in Ralph, the kind that belonged to men who play with hearts like a game. After a pause, Eri shifted topics, asking if Haruka was wealthy because the inn she was staying in was super expensive. The question startled the elf, who nearly confessed in tears that Ralph was paying for it. This earned another sigh from Eri. She immediately advised Haruka to cancel the arrangement before she fell into deeper debt. She recommended Haruka move to the guild dormitory instead, and even offered to handle the transfer and lend her money for the time being. Haruka tried to refuse, unwilling to accept such kindness. But Eri's patience ran out. Her expression hardened as she explained she had personal reasons for interfering. Her friend's pain still lingered, and she wanted to teach Ralph a lesson. Faced with her determination, Haruka couldn't argue. When Haruka finally tasted the drink Eri had ordered, her expression twisted in disgust. The flavor was strange, almost bitter. The reaction made Eri laugh openly. It was, after all, a cheap cafe. The tension between them slowly eased. Haruka saw a lighter side of Eri, less intimidating and closer to her own age. They spoke for a long while. Haruka mentioned her amnesia, and Eri listened with quiet curiosity. They ended up spending the afternoon walking the city, sampling strange foods like roasted bat frog skewers, which looked grotesque but tasted surprisingly good. By evening, they arrived at the guild dormitory to begin registration. Eri apologized for keeping her so long, but Haruka expressed genuine gratitude. The day had been unexpectedly pleasant. Before they parted, Eri hesitated, then asked if Haruka would consider joining her team. She mentioned it was an all-girls group, one she believed Haruka would fit well with. The proposal only deepened Haruka's uncertainty. The kids had already invited her. Despite their kindness, doubt clouded her thoughts. She was mentally older than all of them, weary and directionless. Did she truly belong among the energetic and hopeful? Her old life was filled with indecision. The hesitation lingered until Eri spoke again, snapping her out of it. She told Haruka not to worry so much and to try working with them once before deciding. Haruka, she said, was diligent, serious, and skilled in magic, all valuable qualities. Deep down, Haruka realized she wanted to join those kids, though she lacked the courage to admit it. When she finally did, Eri smiled faintly, noting how little confidence the elf seemed to have. She repeated her offer, saying her own team would always have room if she changed her mind. The dark elf thanked her sincerely, though Eri brushed it off, insisting they were friends now. The word friend struck Haruka deeply. She hadn't anticipated forming a friendship so soon. Afterward, they headed toward the guild's quest board. Eri noticed someone familiar and offered to accompany Haruka, but the elf declined, assuring her she could manage. Eri relented, though her knowing expression suggested an unspoken warning. The Ralph problem wasn't over. Haruka approached the board and began scanning requests. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood beside her, his gaze sharp. After a long moment he spoke, his tone heavy with suspicion. He asked if she was Ralph's new woman. Before she could respond, several of his companions appeared, laughing and making crude remarks about Ralph's interesting taste. Haruka denied the accusation, insisting there was nothing between them, but Aries' warning echoed in her mind. It was already too late. She had stepped into Ralph's shadow. Sighing, she tried to de-escalate, asking them not to trouble her. Yet her attempt at peace was taken as an insult. The man's expression turned cold. Before she could step back, he seized her arm, his grip tightening. He told her he would teach her a lesson. TTO, a towering man with a constant scowl, dragged Haruka into a narrow alley, followed by his jeering companions. His glare brimmed with disdain. Haruka, tense but composed, tried to explain herself. She didn't avoid confrontation out of cowardice, but because she despised unnecessary violence. With quiet humility, she bowed deeply. This is the corporate slave defense mechanism. Bow, apologize, de-escalate. She apologized if she had made them uncomfortable and admitted she had no money to offer. Her calm only deepened TTO's anger. Irritation twisted into cruelty as he sneered, suggesting she could pay in another way if she had no coin. The elf instinctively stepped back. She told him flatly that if he tried to touch her again, she would not hold back. That was all it took. Fury distorted his features as he mocked her. In his mind, a rookie like her stood no chance. Haruka hesitated, assessing the situation. She needed a spell that could defend without killing. Fire was too dangerous. Its damage was too absolute. Water, then. She took a steady breath, focusing her mana. Water began to swirl in her palm, a liquid vortex gathering and thickening. She guided it to multiply, and soon 4 glowing orbs hovered in the air before her. TTO's companions burst into laughter at the sight. To them, a few balls of water were a joke, but TTO did not laugh. His instincts screamed at him to run. His friends didn't understand why. Sweat gathered on his forehead. Most mages could only cast 1 spell at a time. Even the rare adventurers capable of handling 3 were considered prodigies, triple spellcasters, monsters of special rank. Yet the elf before him stood effortlessly controlling 4. Her face calm and unreadable. Without hesitation, Haruka released the spell. The water bullets shot forward with a sharp hiss. TTO raised an arm in reflex, but the liquid pierced his defense, wrapping tightly around his head like a transparent helmet. The force threw him backward. His companions rushed forward, only to be struck by the remaining orbs. Within seconds, all 4 men collapsed, struggling and gasping as water choked their breath. Then, silence. Haruka stood motionless, her gaze fixed on their fallen forms. The adrenaline drained, replaced by a cold, hollow stillness. Her mind was blank. She didn't notice Ari's footsteps until her friend's voice broke the silence. Ari had feared she would arrive too late, but instead found the elf standing pale and trembling among 4 unconscious men. Haruka's face had gone completely white. Horror crept through her expression as the realization struck. She might have killed them. She clutched Ari's arm tightly, her body shaking with panic. She had never wanted to harm anyone. Ari checked the bodies and exhaled in relief. They were alive, just unconscious. Taking Haruka gently by the wrist, she urged her away from the scene. This is the moment Haruka realizes the true weight of her power. It's not a game. If her magic slipped, she could easily take a life. Halfway down the alley, Haruka stopped abruptly. She turned back, a spark of dread on her face. If the men didn't cough up the water trapped inside them, they could still die. Without hesitation, she ran back and knelt beside TTO, rolling his heavy frame onto his side and striking his back several times with growing urgency. Seconds dragged on until at last TTO convulsed, coughing violently as water poured from his mouth. Relief washed through her as he gasped weakly. She helped him sit upright, though her anxious attempt to wake him again resulted in a slap that was way too harsh, leaving a red mark. Moments later, TTO's eyelids fluttered. He blinked in confusion, only to freeze as he saw the dark elf kneeling before him. Haruka's face was drawn with remorse. She bowed her head, intent on apologizing. But TTO misunderstood completely. He saw the gesture as a silent threat, a warning that she was ready to strike again. Terrified, he fell to his knees, stammering apologies and promises to never repeat his mistake. Ari observed the absurd scene unfold. With a quiet exhale, half exasperated and half amused, she accepted TTO's desperate offer to treat them to a meal before Haruka could refuse. They ended up at a cafe far more expensive than TTO could afford. Eri ordered freely, filling the table with meats and sweets, while TTO drowned his shame in ale. Between gulps, he kept apologizing to Haruka, addressing her as Big Sis with drunken sincerity, a title that sounded ridiculous for someone who used to be an old man. As the night wore on, TTO spoke of his frustrations. He confessed to having once loved a childhood friend who now favored Ralph. Jealousy had driven him to foolishly claim he was stronger, only to be mocked for his low rank. That humiliation had curdled into anger, and he misdirected it at the wrong person. Irie teased him mercilessly for the childish jealousy. By the time the meal ended, the bitterness had faded. From that day on, TTO and his companions began following Haruka around. The sight of a burly man calling a slender, dark elf Big Sis became a running joke at the guild. Morning light spilled across the room. Haruka awoke, her clothes clinging uncomfortably. She needed a change soon, but first she had to give Albert and the others her answer. Stepping out of her room, she came face to face with a young woman standing gracefully in the corridor. The stranger had blonde hair and twin tails, a calm smile, and wore an elegant gown shimmering with gold threads. Her demeanor was refined, almost regal. Haruka paused, uncertain. The girl apologized softly for startling her, then introduced herself as Valerie, master of the Golden Wings clan. She explained that she had heard of Haruka through Eri. The revelation struck Haruka with surprise. Valerie wasn't just an adventurer, she was a first-class adventurer, a rank few could ever reach, and Eri's direct superior. In the guild hierarchy, small parties were the lowest tier. Above them were registered teams. At the top were clans, organizations recognized by the guild. Worried she'd caused trouble, Haruka asked if there was a problem. Valerie just smiled, explained she merely wished to greet her, and had brought a small gift. Leaning in with a hint of mischief, she whispered that it was something Haruka would surely need. Underwear. Haruka froze in stunned silence. A first-class adventurer gifting her underwear. This world was getting weirder by the minute. Valerie, amused, offered a polite farewell, leaving the elf holding the gift. Deciding it was best not to dwell on it, she left the package in her room and went to find Albert. The dining hall was not peaceful. Eri and Ralph stood facing each other, their voices sharp. Eri was demanding that Ralph keep his distance from Haruka, while Ralph refused to be ordered around. Before it could escalate, Haruka stepped between them and lowered her head in apology to Ralph for the trouble she'd caused. It was that corporate reflex again. De-escalate, apologize, even when it's not her fault. But the gesture caught TTO's attention. He couldn't stand seeing his big sis bowing to anyone. One of TTO's friends pointed at Ralph, assuming he was trying to take advantage of her. Enraged, TTO confronted him directly, warning him not to lay a hand on her. Eri sighed and muttered something about womanizers and thugs being no different. The air grew heavy with hostility. Haruka could only stand frozen between them, her composure faltering under the pressure. Meanwhile, Corin had gone to fetch Albert, reminding him of their appointment. On their way, they met Montana, and the three headed to the dining hall. Upon entering, they found the place crowded. Someone mentioned a fight, and when they looked closer, they saw Haruka caught in the middle. Corin called out to her. Relief washed over the dark elf's face. She approached them quickly, asking them to wait while she resolved the situation. Albert, Corin, and Montana found seats nearby. Albert mentioned to a man beside them that they had invited Haruka to join their party. The man just laughed, remarking that it looked more like high-ranking adventurers fighting over her. With veterans like that involved, he said, there was little chance she'd join a group of rookies. Albert fell silent, troubled by the thought. But Corin placed a hand on his shoulder, reminding him that the decision was not theirs to make. Across the hall, Haruka turned her gaze toward the three waiting for her. Their anxious expressions betrayed their doubt. They feared she might choose someone else. A quiet resolve settled in her heart. From the beginning, she had already made her choice. She stepped forward, her calm voice cutting through the tension. She declared that she had decided to join Albert's team and had no intention of joining anyone else. Yet, she added, she hoped everyone could get along and that there would be no more conflict because of her. Excited cheers erupted from the three rookies. Montana's tail wagged energetically. Ralph, however, stood silent. his disappointment visible, though he said nothing. As Haruka turned to Ralph, thanking him again for his kindness and apologizing for the debt she couldn't repay, Ralph gave her a faint smile before departing, telling her quietly that if she ever faced trouble again, she should rely on him first. Then he left. Eri let out an exasperated sigh, muttering about smooth-talking men and their endless charm. When the hall finally quieted, Titio approached Haruka with a small bundle. Inside were clean clothes he had prepared for her, having remembered her saying she had none left. The gesture warmed her heart. So much had happened in only a few days. Confusion, tension, and unexpected kindness. Yet, amid it all, she had found new companions and a place to belong. Albert suddenly remembered something. A faint smile crossed his face as he extended his hand toward her. From that moment onward, they would move forward together as a team.